Welcome everyone. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm Helen Margetts. I'm Director of the Oxford Internet Institute, and I'm here to say welcome to all of you and welcome to Dame Stephanie Shirley. It's for the Oxford Internet Institute, it's really a deeply personal kind of experience when Dame Stephanie comes to speak, because she was our founding donor. It was her donation that established the Oxford Internet Institute as a department of the university in 2001 to investigate the social impact of the internet. Without her, the Oxford Internet Institute wouldn't be here. Our colleagues, our students, our alumni, we wouldn't be gathered here today, and number 1 St Giles across the road would be a dusty solicitor's office. She's a really remarkable person who's had a remarkable life. She's going to talk about that, so I shouldn't. But if she misses anything out, her wonderful book, Let It or Let IT Go, is available outside in aid of the Shirley Foundation. It's really gripping, by the way. It's missing your bus stop gripping. It really is. And it was only when I read it that I realised how much your inspiration and your prescience and sort of spirit of innovation is really at the core of the OAI's mission today and into the future. She started a software company when computers had barely entered commercial use. She started with one person, her, and no capital, building up to a business worth over $1 billion. And she did that on the principle of employing women with dependents in non-office environments at a time when most women gave up work and marriage, never mind child rearing. She said in an interview once, "Tomorrow is always going to be different, never like today, and certainly not like yesterday." And if that's not kind of a mission statement for the OAI, devoted to researching life with the internet, I don't know what should be. And that prescience and that spirit of innovation have informed her second life too, after the wealth that came with the sale of the business. Most people use the fruits of their achievements, at least in the first instance, for, I don't know, a few racehorses, jets, jewels, something. But she's used them for, and she's worked for, the public good ever since then, even being the government's ambassador for philanthropy in 2009. She started giving causes related to information technology, like the OAI, moving to focus on the field of autism. The Shirley Foundation enables scientific research now aimed at understanding what autism is as opposed to what it looks like. In 2014, she gave an amazing TED talk, Why Women Have Flat Heads. And I believe this is the stool that she sat on in that TED talk, and I'm sure lots of you have seen that talk. And her message with respect to women and her richness of experience of the glass ceiling at sort of contact point, that which led her to call herself Steve in those early days, has never been more important at a time when sexism in the tech industry is emerging anew in all sorts of ways, some of them ugly. Dame Stephanie has been to the OAI literally the most perfect founding donor you could imagine. She's been a source of wisdom and inspiration through the advisory board to my predecessor, Bill Dutton, the founding director, and to me personally. She's a foundation fellow of Balliol College, our founding college, and I'm really delighted that our other founder, Andrew Graham, previously master of Balliol College, is here tonight. Great to have you here. Her portrait hangs there in the dining hall.
Big portrait.
Dame Stephanie, we really value you, and we're so happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. I'm very sort of proud to be here at Oxford because, as you will understand by the end of this evening, I didn't go to university, and so Oxford and all that it stands for is a sort of miracle for me. I'm here today because, as you've heard, I set up one of these very early software houses, one of the very first to do so, and that was in 1962. 3 years ago, the Science Council nominated me as one of the top 100 practicing scientists in the UK. And I think, I don't really feel like a scientist anymore, but that's how I'm viewed. The Woman's Hour said I was one of the top influential women in the country. So again, there are all sorts of these things floating around, but I'm a real person, and I hope to get to know you in the next one. I mean, science and technology have really opened up a wonderful life for me. But let me start by explaining the background to my innovation. I came to England in 1939 as an unaccompanied child refugee from Nazi Europe, that was. I was at the age of 5. I was clutching the hand of my 9-year-old sister and really had very little idea as to what was going on, why it wasn't a good time to be a Jew in Europe at that time. We had these refugee trains, and basically 10,000 children got out safety in 1939 and 40. And how can one really imagine something like that happening? So imagine a train, about 1,000 children per train with just 2 adults. So you can imagine the sort of bedlam that was. The children we were aged 5 to 16, and we had some small 17-year-olds also snuck in. But the excitement really was, could one get onto this refugee train? Could one be? And I'm very conscious that those refugee trains saved my life. There were also some girls, apart from the children, who were aged 16 plus and really were not eligible to travel at all. But they had come to some agreement with the Nazis that they would come out of Germany looking after younger children, and the deal was that they should return thereafter in order to have this concession. And they must have known that this was to almost certain death. And it always strikes me that the sheer heroism of those young people, it's one thing to be brave when you're my age, but to be brave when you're 16, 17, 18, that really is something. And I want to show you about one of them. I've always honoured those girls that helped on the refugee trains. And recently I came across one of them, Lily Reichenfeld. This is Lily, aged 18. She was hoping to be a social worker. And she was one of the girls that helped on the train and honoured her guarantee and went back to Germany after she'd helped get children out. And finished up in Theresienstadt and died in Auschwitz. Look at that face, 18-year-old. Could I have done that at 18? Certainly not. I think they're great. Thank you very much. Oh, my TED stool is there. I also want to sort of very formally acknowledge the people who helped refugees. In my case, it was the Christian and Jewish activists who set up these Kindertransport trains. It was the Quaker Society of Friends that kept the rescue going when it ran out of money. It was the Catholic nuns that helped to educate me. And it was masses and masses of volunteers who helped in this largest ever recorded migration of children. So without them, I would be dead. the people that do this work have so much responsibility on their shoulders, and I try never to forget that. In particular, I suppose I want to recognise my foster parents, Guy and Ruby Smith, who, as their contribution, basically welcomed me into their home, two rather distraught children, and into their hearts, and I am their child in all but birth. Hitler had taken nationality away from Jewish children, so we arrived stateless. We were called, well, we had some modicum of paperwork, the so-called Nansen passport. Nansen was the explorer, extraordinary that he did humanitarian work as well. So we were formally acknowledged as displaced persons resident here. And later on, how glad I was to get my British passport. And by that time, I'd progressed from being an enemy alien, which is what they categorized me as. And then they realized I was only 5-year-old. So they sort of said, a friendly enemy alien. And then when peace was later declared, it was just a friendly alien. Extraordinary. I took the opportunity on naturalisation, it's an odd word, isn't it, to become naturalised, but anyway, to take British citizenship, of changing my name, and I chose something with the same initial letter. I had an unpronounceable German name, Buchtal, B-U-C-H-T-H-A-L. That was called Butchthal, Bootle, anything like that. But I did change my name on naturalisation in 1951, and chose Brooke in honour of that quintessentially English poet, Rupert Brooke. And so I kept the initial letter, and then of course later on I married and lost it anyway. But of that refugee start, I mean really it has driven my life. I may have been only 5, but it was such an important thing. I will never, ever have to cope with such changes as a new language, a new nationality, new parents, new food, new everything. And that ability to cope with change started in that refugee beginning. I mean, basically, my ability to deal with change and have that resilience has been largely responsible for my entrepreneurial success. The other thing that happened due to that refugee start was that I determined very early on in my life, unhealthily early actually, to make, sounds very priggish, but I determined to make mine a life that was worth saving. And that has really driven my life every day. I try not to fritter the days away. And finally, my love for England, one of the very few countries that would take us children in, has given me a patriotism that perhaps only someone who has lost their human rights can feel. So although I ostensibly lost everything when my parents were forced to send me away, I was not just the victim of bigotry and cruelty. I was also the fortunate beneficiary of the unearned generosity of many people, all good strangers who took it upon themselves to help, and I owe my life to them. I'm a lapsed mathematician. Maths used to be quite rare for women, but I found it beautiful. And I moved into computing in the days when maths really was required for computing. And I could not believe that I should be paid so well for doing something that I enjoyed so much. It was just lovely. Few women are defined by their work, but I am one such. I always knew what I wanted to do, and that was mathematics. Didn't have it in me to contribute at a research level, but then with lucky timing fell in love with computing, which at that time really was very, very different. And there's enormous satisfaction in gaining, grasping the power of a mathematical model. I'm in the National Museum of Computing. So you see in front of you a museum piece. Girls of my generation were not expected to study science. The only sciences then thought respectable was botany. Well, I had to change schools twice in order to be taught mathematics. And tuition was eventually provided in a boys' school. An early introduction to the gauntlet of leering and catcalls and whistling, which were then women's lot, and not all of it has disappeared. I had a very junior position in the scientific public service, in which remuneration went by age and gender. There was one pay scale for men and another much lower pay scale for women. And I found this quite unacceptable, and it was sort of, my job would have been that of a sort of mathematical clerk. There were only few women anyway, and my boss refused to put me up for promotion, and other people said they would never appoint a woman, no matter how brilliant, to any graduate position. So it was quite a struggle in those days. So I went to evening classes for 6 years, 3 times a week, to get my qualifications. Some at what is now part of City University, and believe it or not, there was then no washroom for women students. So my story, really, the first part of my story is of a lucky refugee who became successful as an IT entrepreneur. So let me tell you a bit about that. So to get past the gender issues of the day, I mean, I set up my software company, not just to develop software, but as a company of women, a company for women, an early social business. And it started as a crusade for women. I recruited professionally qualified women who had left the computing industry on marriage or when their first child was expected, and structured them into a home working organisation, a sort of 20th century cottage industry for women. And that crusade for women was the founding philosophy of the business. It was not to make money. And all that made me the laughingstock of the industry. It was unreasonable to try and sell software, because at that time it was given away free with the hardware. No one would sell software, let alone a woman. And my generation of women fought the battles for the right to work and the right for equal pay. I mean, in my first job, when handsome young men used to offer to carry my equipment for me, I used to reply very aggressively, "I believe in equal pay and will carry my own things." So nowadays I say, "Oh, how kind. Thank you so much." People laughed really at the idea of a software house. They laughed at the idea of a lot of women, and the combination was not too good. Although women were coming out of the universities, they were starting to come out of the universities with decent science degrees then, there was really a glass ceiling to our progress, and I'd hit that glass ceiling too often. I wanted opportunities for me and for other women. So we pioneered things. We pioneered the concept of women going back into the workforce after a career break, euphemism for having children. We pioneered all kinds of flexible working, paying people from a cafeteria of benefits, profit sharing, and then later co-ownership when, and I say with great pride, I managed to get a quarter of the company into the hands of the staff at no cost to anyone but me. So I was doing lots of new things. And for years I was the first woman this, the only woman that. In those days, women couldn't legally work on the stock exchange. Legally, we couldn't drive a bus, yet alone fly an aeroplane. I couldn't even open my company's bank account without getting my husband's permission. And the culture of that time was that people would actually sort of say, why go on working? I thought your husband had a good job. Very different now. No one then expected much from women at work or in society, and all the expectations were about home and family responsibilities. I just couldn't accept that, and really started to challenge the conventions of the time. Even as one or two of you know, actually changing my name from Stephanie to Steve in my business development letters, so as to get through the door and be shaking hands before anyone realized that he was a she. My company called Freelance Programmers, and that was exactly what it was. Started on the dining room table with what would now be £100, financed by my own labour and by taking a second mortgage on the marital home. Now, such entrepreneurial activity may seem alien to you, but everyone can be entrepreneurial irrespective of your employment. It's a question of innovation, proaction, strategy. I thought business would fast forward my software career, because that's what I love, but nasty surprise. Soon found myself swamped in business with administration, without which nothing gets done, swamped by issues of tax and legality and HR problems and people problems, data gathering, cash flow. I was paying other people to do the interesting bits. Because lots of people have ideas, and the difficulty always comes with the administration, the implementation. I like doing new things. I like making new things happen. And I enjoyed working with women because we had only 3 men of the first 300 staff. Now, much of what I had to do was tough. The first customers, we tried to be grand and call them clients. The first customers came by personal introduction, my previous employer, an ex-colleague's new employer, and after that I had to sell. I thought selling was trying to show my technical expertise, that I was competent, and I painfully learned that selling is not about that at all. It's all about listening, listening hard to what customers' needs are. I learned that that was what was selling, and I learned about the importance of marketing. My interests were scientific. The market was commercial. Things such as payroll, which apart from the size of some of the files I found boring. So I went for operational research work, which is both intellectually challenging and valued by the customers. things like scheduling freight trains for British Rail, timetabling buses, stock controls, so-called scientific management was coming in at the time. So there was lots and lots of stock control, and gradually the work came in. We disguised the domestic and part-time nature of the workforce by offering fixed prices. Again, one of the first to do so. Who would have guessed that the programming of the black box flight recorder for Supersonic Concorde was done by a bunch of my staff working from their homes? The software took analog readings from all the instruments, recording things such as height and acceleration and so on, and organized them into what's called a best protected black box. And there's a separate black box to safeguard the recording of the cockpit noises. I don't think that the boxes are or ever were black. I mean, the only one I ever saw was bright yellow. But it was an important and valuable and exciting project. But what do I remember about it? Not the technology, not the methodology, but the hassle I had in collecting the money for it. And I was sitting on the director's floor of the General Electric Company for days, answering. People sort of said, "What are you doing then?" I said, "I'm waiting to get paid." And eventually a message came from the chairman, Arnold Weinstock, saying, "Ask Mrs. Shirley to come back tomorrow morning and her cheque will be ready," because they wanted me out. But the sheer hassle of business tends to get forgotten. We had another early project that was quite seminal, and that was to develop software standards, sort of management control protocols. Software was and is a maddeningly hard to pin down activity, so that was enormously valuable, and we were able to use those standards ourselves. We were even paid to update them over the years, and eventually those standards were adopted by NATO. Lots of interesting tasks. I chased after everything that moved. I remember being asked to design software to recognize fingerprints, and at that time said, no, I couldn't do that. Our programmers, remember, only women, including gay and transgender. They worked in those days with pencil and paper to develop flow charts defining the task to be done, and then converting those flow charts into code, usually machine code, sometimes binary, and then sending it by mail to a data center where it would be punched onto a punch card or paper tape, and then repunched in order to verify it. All this before you ever got near the computer. And our schedules were based on 2 accesses to the computer a week. In 1975, 13 years from the company's startup, Britain's equal opportunities legislation came in, which meant that it was illegal to have our pro-female policies. And as an example of unintended consequences, my woman's company had to let the men in. When I started my company of women, the men said, "How interesting." But of course it only works because it's small. You remember them patronizing me. And as the company grew, the same men said, well, they recognized, yes, it's sizable now, but of no strategic interest. And later still, when the company was valued at over $3 billion, and I'd made 70 of the staff into millionaires, those people had the nerve to comment to me, "Well done, Steve." But of course, it's nothing new What an attitude to change. You can always tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat on top from being patted patronizingly. We used also to have larger feet so as to stand away from the kitchen sink. When the company was finally acquired 10 years ago, it was a PLC employing 8,500 staff, men and women, which is as it should be. I've always been involved with research. I love to learn. I'm often asked if I'm a feminist. I am indeed, but not in word. I am a humanist, totally committed to valuing each human being and convinced that every single one of us can make a difference. So let me share 2 secrets of my commercial success. Surround yourself with people of quality and people that you like, not necessarily people like you. And choose your partner, any partner, very carefully. The other day when I said, my husband's an angel, a woman complained. You're lucky, she said. Mine's still alive. Going back to my company, I have really had no experience of running an organization. And in a way, ignorance was bliss. Nobody had taught me what one couldn't do in business, and so I just went ahead and did it. I wasn't constrained, had the freedom to innovate and to make mistakes. For example, my lack of commercial expertise meant that our pricing started off wrong and stayed wrong year after year. We had a sort of profitless prosperity, though it did get us market share. On the other hand, I came up with new ways of staffing, new ways of marketing, new ways of financing the business. And what carried me through was, I think, the sheer guts that is really necessary for any leader to cope with failures. And I had many, to admit to mistakes, face up to them, pick myself up, brush myself down, and move on. There were 2 factors in the long run that really accounted for my company's growth, and they're both to do with control. I decided the concept of spreading ownership in the company, stimulated by the John Lewis Partnership, that really struck me as something that I wanted to do, I needed to do. And secondly, where many entrepreneurs fail, I realized my own limitations and brought in professional managers to take the group forward. But relinquishing management control proved very difficult, painful. And that period was one of heavy strain for me. I became highly stressed, both at home and professionally, traveling too much, smoking too much, exercising not at all. I burnt out and I broke down. I effectively couldn't operate anymore. It's not easy to build a business, and the cost in human terms can be horrendous. The company wasn't always successful. We failed as often as we succeeded. We sold our Danish subsidiary to the staff. We sold our Dutch subsidiary to a client. We closed down the American company, which was on the east and west coast, which had started as a franchise, only to restart there 20 years later and then make a success of it. The time scale of business, anyone who says that business is boring really should try it for a bit. But in 1978, I was speaking of all those international attempts. In 1978, I found myself writing reports about the possibility of developing software in India. And it was in 1998, it took 20 years for that actually to happen. And during which time things had moved from being India providing access to a cheap workforce to actually providing a workforce, a skilled workforce in short supply. And that move to export software was, I think, quite seminal to Britain. Half the staff were in India when the company was finally taken over, half of them. There were years of lots of activity, but no profit. Years of profit when we went international. Anyway, as a software entrepreneur, I eventually made serious money. By the millennium, I was worth over 150 million. Though it was 25 years before my company paid a dividend. Bill Gates took only 10 years with Microsoft. When it was finally taken over, it was a public company, co-owned by its 8,500 staff. And it's now the stereo part of the Software Stereo Group. What I'm trying to indicate, I suppose, is that success is found at the edge of failure. And if it were easy, we'd all be millionaires. Women's careers are often depend on our child rearing. So I'd like to tell you about the family side of my life. Our late son, Giles, was a beautiful, contented baby. And then at 2.5 years old, like a changeling in a fairy story, he lost the little speech that he had and turned into a wild, unmanageable toddler. Not the terrible twos. He was profoundly autistic, and he never spoke again. People with autism have difficulties communicating, forming relationships with others, and just making sense of the world around them. It's a spectrum disorder. It can be devastating, as it was with my Giles, but many of those affected are not like Giles. They have high intellect, so you meet them in the universities. Although Giles was classed as ineducable, nobody attempted to teach him. He came under health rather than education. I got him into a weekly boarding school for non-communicating children, and for a few years we had a relatively reasonable time. My sister came over from Australia to help me with him. And then puberty struck at 11, which is far too early, really. Giles couldn't take the transition at all. Not only did he become violent, he was a big, strong lad, but his epilepsy also started then. And I couldn't get him any secondary schooling at all. So he stayed at home with me. And that was a dreadful period for all of us. When Giles was 13, I did break down because vulnerable children bring out the best in most of us, most of the time, but their incessant demands can really unmask our own weaknesses. Both of us finished up in hospital. I was in hospital for a month. I was only back at work after a year. The company kept very quiet about it. Giles stayed in a so-called subnormality hospital in a locked ward for 11 years. And he would have stayed there forever. After all, asylum means a safe place. Except that after 11 years, he began to lose some of his human rights. I don't want to go into detail. So we decided to look after him again ourselves. This time the company was successful and I could plan to have paid help. It took us 6 years to deinstitutionalize him, but eventually Giles was leading a simple but dignified life in the community. And thus he became the first resident in the first home of the first charity that I set up. It was founded to really pioneer services for autism. And today that charity supports 143 adults, all with profound autism, and is contracted to keep an overview of over 100 people with Asperger, high-level autism, on a weekly basis, people that in the main live independently. The charity employs 300 staff. The technology is still there. Fingerprints are today used to provide safe keys for the use for the bedrooms, access keys that can't be lost, fingerprints. And so it was that my business story led to my current life in philanthropy. It took me 17 years to get that first charity sustainable, by which I mean managerially and financially independent of me. Then 5 years for the next charity. I'm a learning person. I was also able to invest more money, which always eases things. Cost up to date is £68 million. Entrepreneurs tend to pursue a lot of things simultaneously, and I'm so lucky to always have something to get up for each morning. My second charity was Prior's Court Special School, just up the road in Newbury. That now has 98 pupils, aged 5 to 25, a young adult centre for 20 students, and over 600 staff, plus one teaching robot. Pupils, many without speech, use modified iPads and are learning coding in much the same way as those 3-year-olds would do in nursery school. And my most strategic charity of all is Autistica, which funds medical research. Giles died unexpectedly in the middle of all that. I'd already lost my parents, my foster parents, my sister. Most things get easier the next time. But that's not true of grief, the last expression of love. I lost all momentum for several months, but eventually my energy returned and was followed by a period of enormous creativity. I initiated 31 projects in 1999. I have now calmed down and learnt to live without Giles, without his need of me. And whenever I find a gap in autism services, I try to help. Currently, I'm in the final months of a 3-year think tank for autism. That's called the National Autism Project. So that some of my wealth goes back into the industry from which it stems, I do also support IT projects, IT ventures, including the IT livery company, number 100, nicely sounding binary, in the City of London, and of course the Oxford Internet Institute, to focus on the social, economic, legal and ethical aspects of this network of networks, not the technology. And I'm enormously proud of the OOI, and I'm so happy to see so many of you here. What else have I funded at Oxford? The Autism Brain Bank at John Radcliffe, now the largest such brain bank in the world. A number of medical research projects, including a randomized control study of sleep problems of children with autism, and parents are pretty keen on that. Several works of art to the Meg Centre at the Warneford Hospital. At that time it was autism specific. I often give works of art. And I made a £1 million challenge grant for Balliol to convert St Cross Church into its historic collection centre. Balliol showed its appreciation by commissioning that big oil painting. Philanthropy is all that I do now. I need never worry about getting lost because several charities would come and find me. People think philanthropy is just for wealthy people, but everyone can be a philanthropist. I used to do occasional shifts at Oxford's Gatehouse charity for homeless people. Now, if you give 50p to a street person, that's a generous act. But once you start thinking, what is this person doing on the streets? What do we have to do to get him into a shelter, her into employment? Then you start thinking like a philanthropist. And that's true whether you give 50p or £50,000. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I call on you too to give your time, skills and money, because you too can be a philanthropist. And you can enjoy the pleasure of giving as I do. And certainly the more money I give away, the richer my life seems to become. Thank you very much. I'm running a bit late.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm sure people would... We have a little bit of time for questions. Tim will come with a microphone. We are recording this, so if you mind about that, please come and tell us afterwards and we'll edit you out. And perhaps you could say who you are and where you come from, which bit of the OII you come from, or from where else you come from. Okay. Anybody like to ask questions? There's one here, Tim, and one at the back.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was hugely inspirational, very, very interesting. I'm wondering, given that, so you clearly think that the OII is worth investing in, or thought it was, has your kind of vision for the OII when you first donated been fulfilled? Is it being fulfilled? Is there anything you'd rather was happening here?
In many ways, I just think it is marvellous. It exceeds all expectations. I think absolutely great. And I'm not just saying this to this audience. I'm very proud of it, and you know, nationally as well. The directors heard me say this again before. I'm a bit disappointed that it's still very British. And I think post-Brexit, we have to start thinking internationally, and I'm hoping in the next few years to see it extend outside. We've had this argument over and over again. But I think it's marvellous. I just hope it'll get more international.
Thank you.
There was one question here, and then over there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Catherine. You mentioned the notion of the reason you get up in the morning. And in Japanese, there's a delightful term called ikigai, and that means just that. And I'm curious, if you still kind of think about that on a daily basis, and if so, what your reason was, for instance, for today.
I tried to explain how important my childhood has been to me. Certainly each day I still think in terms of what am I going to do today, what am I going to experience, what am I going to make happen, what can I do that's worthwhile and that I can be proud of. That hasn't faded with the years at all. In fact, as I've got older, the pressure to do some of the things that I want to do or think I'm capable of giving to the world, you know, you have the feeling of time running out. I don't start 10-year projects anymore. And that gives a good, I'm not sure whether it's a healthy dimension to my life. I've finished up in a way I couldn't have imagined my life as it is today, but I do as much as I can, taking my health into account. So I have to pace myself, otherwise I get overtired, blah, blah, blah. But that just happens with the years, and you learn to live with it and realize your experience is, in fact, a very positive thing on which you and others can build. I hope that explains.
Wow. There was you there, I noticed, and Vicky, and no? Oh, it was Gina, sorry. But you were the next one. Sorry, I don't know how to describe.
Thank you very much. I'm alumnus and also an entrepreneur, though not in your league, I'm sad to say. You talk very candidly in your book about crises in your mental health, and you have done tonight as well. What I would like to know is, what would your advice be? How do you bounce back from that? Because you've done it not once but twice. So what would your advice be to people who find themselves in that situation?
I think when things go badly, we tend to sort of close in on ourselves and not talk about it because we think we're ashamed of our lack of progress or whatever it is. And once you can really talk freely to a person, whether it's a psychiatrist or an analyst or your best friend, things begin to come into perspective. And we all need people to sort of say, Steve, that's nonsense. Steve, you're making that up. It's not that at all. Don't you remember? It's so-and-so. We need that sort of communication. And I think that would have been very preventative, had I had enough sense to be able to communicate in my difficult times. I think in business you are encouraged to talk about the good things. My colleagues never liked it when I sort of said, I don't know. They sort of said, you're supposed to know. And I mean, in the real world, we're still all learning, and we continue to learn. And that, what's the word I want? It's not sensitivity, that ability to absorb what life throws at you is quite a valuable quality. People talk about resilience, and it's something like, I mean, now I feel like I've been a refugee, I've had cancer, I've lost my only child. You know, what else can life throw at me? And it gives you a lot of, well, what else can life throw at me? It gives you a lot of confidence I can do it.
Both Tim. Gina?
Thank you for your talk tonight. I'm Gina Neff at the OII. What advice would you give for women in technology today besides be sure to have a flat head?
There's a lot of discussion today about getting, especially young women, into STEM subjects. There's some misunderstandings about what science and technology can give to us as employees, to us as people. And for people starting out, whether it be male or female, find something that you really enjoy doing, then get trained in it, then get more trained, and then just go ahead and do it. And that will see you through life.
Well, there's two behind you, Tim. One in the back row and one to... Well, and here, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Andy Garavaglia. I'm a member of the MBA program at Oxford Said, and a member of a couple of my colleagues are also in the audience. So from a new technologies perspective, I was wondering, and I think some of my colleagues would be interested, what is the technology kind of up and coming, whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, any new technology that, any new technology that kind of gets you excited?
You've come to the wrong person.
All right.
No, I'm now an early adopter. But I mean, I was working with virtual reality in 1998. And you think, well, yes, it's now doing some of the things that I was hoping it would do. Most things take much longer than you imagine. You think it's just started 18 months ago. But I enjoy what the technology can do. I try to think what difference it makes to society, but I'm not a technologist in any way for many years. Sorry.
No, thank you.
There was one in the back row, Tim.
Hi, is this working? Yeah. I hate microphones. I'm Amber. I'm a current student. I'm doing the part-time MSc. You mentioned at the beginning that you didn't go to university, and I'm wondering if you had gone, how you feel that would have impacted you and what difference it would have made.
It certainly made me quite embittered for many years. I had a real chip on my shoulder till I was about 30. Because I think I would have enjoyed university and that wonderful independence in the early years. It might have dampened down my energy and drive, I don't know. I like to belong to things, and so I think I would have been very loyal to Oxford or whichever alumni I would have been in. I would have been a very different sort of person, and intellectually, I'm sure, well in advance of what I ever achieved. But from the life point of view, I've probably finished up in the right place. At the age of 23, I'd got a decent degree and I'd got 5 years' experience. So you just have to build on that.
There's lots, and I'm afraid not everybody's going to be able to, I think. Maybe we take two more, is that all right? Is that all right? Two more?
Yeah.
2 more questions? Okay. Well, one in the back, just where you are, Tim, and then one here at the front.
Hi, my name is Kavaz Arish. I'm also an MSc student here at OII. I was wondering the sense of patriotism that you talked about that you can only earn from having the experience that you had, and how do you feel about the environment in the UK, but specifically initiative of another fellow refugee, Dobbs Amendment by Lord Dobbs in the House of Lords, and how that was treated, not only through populism of public opinion, but also through leadership of people in the position of power.
Well, I do love this country. Probably the first time I was ever ashamed of something British was when the refugee crisis started 3 or 4 years ago. And I actually on radio said I was ashamed of Britain because we were doing so little. The difference between the organized structure, and I mean, not everybody got out then, but there was an organized structure led by the religious establishments, in the plural. Somehow we don't see that anymore now. Are we that much more selfish? There were people that came forward and took us children in. Life wasn't as rich in material ways then, so it must have been quite difficult to feed a couple of extra children. Schools were not free at that time. You either got a scholarship or somebody had to pay for you. things have moved on so much. Why is it that our reactions to refugees today are much more alien, are much more fearful, are much more racist than they were for Jewish children in 38, 39? There will always be hate in the world, I'm sure. But it seems that the Dubs Amendment was very reasonable, that said Britain would take in, I think, 3,000 children or something like that. In fact, only a few hundred have come in. For goodness knows, was it mismanagement? I don't know. But it's very, very disappointing. Thank you for the question.
Perhaps one question here.
Thank you. I've recently been working with the Oxfordshire Community Foundation. I was very pleased that you raised the point about philanthropy at the end of your talk. But it's very clear that in this country we seem to have lost the tradition of philanthropy. We need to get it back. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how we can encourage philanthropy again among the British people.
Well, I was the National Ambassador for Philanthropy in 2009-10, so I really at that time spent a lot of time thinking about it, talking about it, travelling around the country, trying to find out what was going on. I've mentioned that philanthropy is not a matter of scale. I think not quite sure where this sentence is going. Sorry. When there is a disaster in the world, a tsunami or something like that, people are enormously generous. The money pours in, £5 here, £10 there, 50p there. It really, people are generous. But when it comes to some of the other things, yeah, I agree. I think wealthy people do not give as well as they might. And they cut themselves off from this idea that giving gives you so much pleasure. It is a reciprocal activity. And this is why I always talk about the pleasure of philanthropy. It's not a duty. Some faiths do think of it as a duty. Muslims do, Jewish people do. I think of it as just a wonderful way of living. And it makes me feel good. And brain studies show that the pleasure centres of the brain are stimulated when we act unselfishly. So we get as much as we give. Thank you.
Thank you. We should probably stop there. People are invited for a drink outside. I'd just like to thank you once again, Dame Stephanie. It seems to me in the questions we've had quite a lot of reasons to be truly international and not and less British, perhaps. I just would like to say, I've heard your story more than once. I've read your book, but I never fail to be sort of moved, inspired and excited in equal measure, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone. Thank you.